Oh hey, it's Wes. And today, buckle in, because it's time to go over all my settings. Just not one setting, let's get it all out of the way. I'll have links in the description to particular timestamps where various things happen in this video. So, without further ado, let's get this started. How do I set up, from start to finish, my a7 III? Say you just got this new camera, you're not really sure what you want to do with it, I would consider this a great starting point to run through and change all these settings. Unfortunately, Sony's cameras are very complicated. One of those things is they have a lot of features. And the way that they're set up by default isn't necessarily the most accessible, the most user-friendly, or even the most useful for most people. I wish they would change things around a little bit, but maybe that's just my own personal biases and personal preferences. Because we all want and need different things. So let's do this. I'm going to go into the camera here. You'll notice in the top of the menu there are 6 tabs. I'm in the Toolbox tab. And in the 7th page of the Toolbox tab. That's a lot of tools. Alright, I'm going to go to Settings Reset. And in that I'm going to go to Initialize. So Camera Settings Reset just does some basics. Initialize, scrapes it all right back down to the bare bones. Okay. And now I basically have a brand new a7 III. I've already updated the firmware to the latest 3.1, so you can follow along with me to set this up as the latest camera. Language English, enter date and time. I am running on Santiago time. I'm going to fast forward through a lot of this, so it's not going to be real time, but some of these things you don't need to watch me do in real time. Enter. Play Memories app is actually obsolete at this point. It's kind of funny that even in the latest firmware, they're asking you to do that. You should actually be looking for the Imaging Edge app. Okay, so here we start. One of the first things that I like to do actually is go in and change my copyright information before I forget, so that any picture that I take on this will be stamped for myself. Set copyright. And as is the case with a lot of these things with Sony, I can't tap the screen. This would be so much easier if I could tap the screen, but I can't. Thankfully, I'm old enough to remember T9 typing, so I'm quite used to this sort of thing. Whew, that was painful. Alright, so I've got my copyright info in. We're going to start right at the beginning of the menu. So in this first stage, I'm going to go through the entire menu, not every item, a lot of them will just stay at the defaults, and do those settings. And then we're going to go through the My Menu settings, and the function menu, and then finally I'm going to show you how I customize the buttons on the camera itself. So again, you can skip ahead, skip back, fast forward, pause if you need to get through this. And here we go. File format, I always shoot in just RAW. That's up to you. And I shoot RAW compressed unless I'm doing real estate or very high dynamic range stuff. I'll go to uncompressed. It's fine for me. Switch the JPEG to extra fine. Doesn't affect me right now, but if I switch to JPEG, I like to have the highest quality. I want APS-C set to auto. Long exposure noise reduction, I turn that off. Makes things a little bit faster, and you want to talk to someone who does astrophotography to really get into that sort of thing. It's not my expertise. When I'm doing long exposures, it's generally real estate, and noise isn't an issue for me. Drive mode, I'm generally in continuous shooting. Select media, slot 1. Focus mode, I generally stay in continuous AF for most things, and we'll get into switching of that a little bit later in the video. Autofocus illuminator, I like to turn off. I find it just kind of is an annoyance most of the time and isn't really needed. And in the face eye autofocus, right now we'll set it to human, we'll turn it on, and we'll put the face detect frame display because I like to know whether or not it's got the face, even if it doesn't have the eye. AF with shutter, I don't do back button autofocus, especially on my A9, which I will do a later video setting up as well. Pre-autofocus, turn that off, saves battery, saves annoyance for me. Autofocus area registration, we definitely want that, and we'll talk about setting up that in a moment. Actually, why not just do that right away? So I'm going to go into the C2 button, which is focus area, and change that to flexible spot small, and I'll put that in a rule of thirds location right up here in the corner of the screen. And then I'm going to hold down the function button, and that has registered that focus area. And now, if I hold down a pre-assigned button, it will automatically switch over to that focus point that I have registered. So if I'm in the wide area, I press that button, it switches me over. Now later on, I'm going to assign that button when I go through the buttons. AF area auto clear, I like to turn that on. It just cleans up the screen a little bit when you're focusing on things. Generally depends. I wouldn't turn that off until you really trust the camera and are used to it though. ISO is currently set to auto, but we're going to change that depending on what we're doing in manual mode. Face priority and multimetering, I like to have that on. Spot metering point, I like to link that to the focus point. That's a super convenient function. If you're using your focus point and you've aimed at something, it's in the top right corner, your spot metering will then tie to that focus point, which is great. We want our flash on fill flash, which helps the compatibility with Godox flashes and third-party flashes. Red eye reduction, I always turn that off. Dynamic range, or DRO, auto HDR, that only affects JPEG photos, changes how it exposes them. Since I'm in RAW, that doesn't really matter that much. Creative style is set to standard. I go to standard, which is fine, and then I actually lower the contrast, lower the saturation a bit, and up the sharpness. Why is that? It actually helps you reviewing your images and the image in the viewfinder. It's changing the preview of how you see the picture, and it makes it easier to see. And I generally use that also for my video settings. If you bring down the contrast without using an S-Log or a high dynamic range format in video, it still gives you a wider dynamic range, and it's easier to manage video files without a lot of overhead and work in applying lookup tables. So picture profile is currently off. We're not going to get into anything advanced right now. Focus magnification time, I like to keep that at no limit. I hate it when it cuts out while I'm still focusing in manual focus. And peaking, I like to have on all the time when I'm manually focusing. I put it to low though, just so it doesn't get overboard, and I usually like the color to be red. Anti-flicker, I pretty much always leave this on. Helps to manage when you're shooting under fluorescent lights or flickering light sources, only with mechanical shutter. Moving right along to the movie modes, and this is generally where I stay, 1080p, which is XAVC SHD, and 60p. That's how I record my videos. And the default's good for that too. Autofocusing tracking, at least when I'm doing my videos, I set it to fast and responsive because if I'm moving around, it just seamlessly tracks me in the video, as you can see in this camera right here. Now, if you're doing artistic or actually want the camera to look as though it's pulling focus between object to object, you might want to turn that down a bit on both of those things. It'll look more natural if you keep it at the defaults. And I like to turn on movie with shutter, just in case I'm filming like I am right now. All I need to do is reach around and touch the shutter button to activate the movie recording. I don't have to reach all the way around to get that record button. Electronic first curtain shutter, I leave it on for now. I'm going to have another video in the future talking at great length about that because it is a very complicated topic, but one that can affect you in many, many different ways. Now, I like to change release without card to disable. So if you don't have a memory card in the camera, it won't take a picture. Now if you're shooting on this camera or even an A9, it will actually buffer those pictures until you put a memory card in and then write it. So they're not lost right away. But I want it to tell me right up front that I shouldn't be taking pictures. I do like to leave release without lens on because then that lets you use very manual lenses like this one, Minolta Rockor 50. You've got a little newer adapter on it to get it on the camera. It works great. Phenomenal lens. I actually use it for my close-ups in a lot of videos. Alright, display button in monitor. So here, I take off the graphic display, which is off by default anyway. I generally spend my time in no display info when I'm shooting with the camera in my hands. I like to have display all info as an option. Turn off Instagram for the monitor. We'll talk about that in a bit. I leave the level on, and I turn off for viewfinder because that's kind of an old DSLR sort of way of doing it. So these are the ones that I leave on. Now you might say, I thought professionals use a histogram. Well, if I really need to get my exposure right, I don't want to be looking at the monitor anyway, so I leave the histogram option in the viewfinder. I'll stick my eye in there to see what I need to see. And I take out the level, because generally I just use the level for like real estate and stuff like that, and I don't need it when it's in the viewfinder. And I'll turn display all info back on, because sometimes I just need to know. Alright, zebras. I love having zebras. I turn them on all the time. They're a little distracting initially, but then you get used to them. I set it to 100 plus, which means if the exposure is at 100% or above, you get the zebras. And the zebras will tell you what's overexposed in your picture and will be difficult to recover the exposure of. Grid lines, I actually turn on the rule of third grid because it's helpful in composing an image. It'll overlay that the whole time you're shooting. Continuous shoot length, set that to shoot only. It puts a bar in the corner of in the side of your screen, shows you how much buffer you have left while you're shooting. I find that pretty useful, lets you know whether or not you're about to reach the limit, whether or not you need to pull back just a little. It's helpful. Some people find it distracting. Auto review, we'll leave that off. We can chimp later when we have time. I'm going to skip over the custom keys for now as we continue to go through the setup. I actually reverse my dials. I like to have the aperture on the back of the camera here and the shutter speed on the front. Movie button always works, so if you're hybrid shooting, taking pictures, you can press the movie button at any time and start recording unless you're currently buffering. Audio signals, I like to turn those off. I don't need the focus confirm, I can see it in the viewfinder. Airplane mode, I actually like to leave that on unless I'm going to need it. Saves just a little bit of battery power. Not a lot, but I'll take what I can get. I don't really change any of these settings here in playback. Alright. Viewfinder brightness. Hello. I actually switched that to manual and +2. Why is that? I find in the a7 III the viewfinder brightness, the auto compensation, isn't very smart. And it often trips me up, so I just manually set it myself. I usually just keep it at bright and pop out the histogram if I really need it. On the a9 I find it's much more reliable in its exposure. Personally, I switch delete confirm to delete first, so when you go to delete a picture, it pops up with your cursor already on delete. This might be dangerous for some people, but I find it saves me a lot of time if I'm deleting in camera. Display quality. You definitely want to turn this up to high. It improves the resolution that you're seeing in the viewfinder and the display. If you have it on standard, it improves the battery life, and it's set to standard so that its SIPA rating can be higher. The battery life is fine to begin with. Speaking of which, I actually turn my power save time all the way up to 5 minutes. I generally have several batteries with me on a wedding day anyway, so this isn't an issue for me. And I definitely want to turn the auto power off temp to high. It can cause degraded image quality, but I would rather have a little bit higher noise in my picture because the camera's too hot than have it not working at all. If you set it to this, it almost will never shut down due to high heat situations. Touch operation, I like to have on. I wish there was more touch operation, but can't always get what you want. I like to use touch panel plus pad, and I'll show you what that means. Switch this to relative position, so when you put your finger down, it just moves based on where your finger starts, because when your eye's in the viewfinder, you don't really know where you're touching it. And I switch this to the right 1/4 of the screen. So that means when I'm looking through the viewfinder and I put my thumb on this one right corner, I can move the cursor around just as though I was using the thumbstick. Just gives you another option. Why do I use only the right 1/4? It's because I have a huge nose. And if I use 1/2, it kind of rubs in the middle of the screen and can move things around. HDMI settings. I like to switch this from auto to 1080p. That makes it respond much more quickly when you plug it into a monitor. Just be aware if the monitor you're plugging it into doesn't support 1080p, you're going to have to change that. But when it does, and you switch from live view to reviewing your photos and the menu, things are much snappier. And I use a monitor all the time here, so it greatly improves my quality of life. So that's great there. USB connection. Setting it to auto sometimes confuses things. You usually want it in mass storage. That allows you to plug it into a computer and get information off it. If you're using tethering, say with Capture One, you want to switch that to PC remote. So just be aware that you'll need to change that from time to time. USB power supply you always want on so you can charge your camera easily. You already have that stuff set up. I don't really care about the folders and the image naming. I rename them on export anyway. Record media settings. This is going to be my regular everyday thing. So slot 1 is important. I'm going to be doing simultaneous images and videos. And so it's writing images and videos in RAW to both cards simultaneously. If you want to hear more about my sports settings, which are a little bit different from this, check this link right up here. There's a little bit of extra stuff to go on in there to get that done. Check my version. I'm in 3.10, and that's our latest. And so that's going through the entire menu and what I do in the menu itself. Now we're going to set up our custom menus. So first our My menu and then my function menu. So now that we're in this My menu, it's very important to set this up and get it ready for you. Because did you see how many settings we went through there? We don't want to do that all again. We don't want to sort through there. So we're going to put in every menu item that I actually use. We'll start out, file format, number 1. This lets you switch between RAW and JPEG if need be. File type, and this allows you to switch between compressed and uncompressed, and I do that on the fly. JPEG quality, if say I am sending something to my phone or setting up a photo booth, I will actually turn the JPEG quality down a little bit so that it transfers more easily. Next up, I'm going to go to movie mode and put in my record setting. So that will let me switch between 60p and 30p, 24p very quickly. And then my AF drive speed, that will let me switch between medium and fast AF, only in video, doesn't affect photo taking. So if I want something snappy like this, or if I want something natural, I can go back and forth between them easily. Heading over to the shutter, and this one is key. We're going to put in the electronic first curtain shutter. I changed that a lot. I'm going to go to our network settings and put in airplane mode. Because I do turn that off again when I need to send it to my phone, so I like to have easy access to it. And then I'll add in cleaning mode. Just keep an eye on where I am in these tabs. It may seem like I'm going through in random order, but basically they're in the order. Each page is the order of how often I use things. So the first page is stuff that I might need quite a bit, second page is stuff that only sometimes, and so on. Then I'm going to add record media settings, which lets me change from my regular dual redundant to my sport mode more easily. Then I'm going to go back over to some video settings, and I'll put my slow and quick recording settings in there. You might have to search around in these menus to find everything that you need because, yep, there is a lot of stuff in here. And honestly, I get lost in this menu all the time, which is why we need to set this up. APS-C mode, gotta add that. And, as I said before, I like to set my viewfinder manually. Viewfinder brightness goes in there. I wish that I could map it to an external button. I don't know why, but that's not a possibility because that's what I do with my monitor brightness. I put it on an external button. And then our last page, I'm going to add format so I can format my cards easily. I add photo custom keys, movie custom keys, and function menu set, because sometimes I like to go in and change things, especially if I'm on a particular shoot and I find that I'm using something a lot. I want to be able to go in and change that. So that is my My Menu. Now, when I go in here and go to the star from My Menu, I have 4 pages here. The first 3 are my most used functions, and then the last one lets you add or sort things later on. Next up, we want to change our function menu, which is what you get when you press the FN button. It's a bunch of stuff that I find to be a bit redundant in there right now. So now I can just go to My Menu, Function Menu Set, and get this started. So first of all, audio record level. If you don't do video, maybe this won't be that interesting for you, but I like to be able to change that quickly. Then our second one, I'm going to change to metering mode. Because sometimes, believe it or not, I don't shoot in full manual. Let's say you're having a wedding ceremony and half the party's in the sun and half the party's in the shadow. It's actually much better, much easier to just switch it to auto ISO or auto shutter speed, depending on how bright it is, and get it to bounce back and forth for you. Next up, picture profile. Since I sometimes use these manual lenses, again, like this one right here, I need to be able to adjust my steady shot focal length. There we go. And I don't even know why ISO shows up in the function menu. It's ridiculous that they even put it there. It's just a waste. One thing that I change quite a bit is live view display for doing flash photography. We already turned this on, but in case we need to turn it off if we're doing some fast shooting and anti-flicker shooting. And we move on to the second line in the function menu. Going to go to peaking level. Sometimes you need to turn it up to be able to see it. Next line, we're going to go to white balance, even though it's right there, whatever. Creative style. We're going to change our file formats here. Oops, there. And we're going to get our zebras to round this off. There we go, and now we have my function menu. So these are the functions that I most like to have easy access to. Some of them are actually redundant to the My Menu. Why would I do that? Well, sometimes I'm in the menu, sometimes I'm not. If I'm in the menu, I'll change it there. If I'm shooting, I'll change it in the function menu. Just nice to have easy access to it wherever I am. Speaking of easy access, let's finally get to the most important part, setting up our buttons on the camera. Right now they're set up to a bunch of honestly weird stuff that I wouldn't necessarily want. You might, but again, we're talking about how I set my camera up. So this is the most important part for me, custom key. So we have the option of setting custom keys that change depending on whether you're in photo mode or video mode. There's only one difference that I make there, and I'll tell you why that is in a moment. Mostly, we're just going to set it up in photo mode and let video mode mirror that. Control wheel, I don't know why they don't set this by default. It should be set to ISO. Because oh my goodness, this makes your life so much easier when you can switch ISO, aperture, and shutter speed all at once without going into any menus or pressing any buttons. They're all available. Boom. And honestly, that's one of the biggest advantages of these Sony cameras. You have 3 wheels that can always be used at all times. Next up, I'm going to change custom button 1 to subject detection. Number 2, focus area, I stay there. Number 3, I like to change to silent shooting. There it is. Number 4 is how I change my monitor brightness. So at any time I can press this C4 button and adjust how bright the monitor is. Much easier. Let's keep going here on page 2. So this is the center of your thumbstick here. I'm going to change that to registered AF area toggle. So this lets you now press this button, and all of a sudden you have an AF box. I wish it was red like you can on the A9, but still not available here. And then when you're done with it, you can press it again and go back to whatever focus mode you want. In the A9, this is actually much easier because you can limit the number of focus modes that are in play and put them back again later if you need, but that can really simplify your experience. In the a7iii, they always show up there, so it's a little bit slower. Center button. I'm going to change that. Live view display. So what that does is it changes setting effect on and off. You usually want that on, especially when you're shooting with natural light, but if you're shooting in flash in a dark area, you actually want to turn that off, because then your camera will have an easier time grabbing focus and you'll have an easier time seeing things through the viewfinder. But generally you want that on so that you can tell at all times what your picture is going to look like before you even take it. It's one of the advantages of mirrorless. Left button, drive mode, I like that. Right button, by default it's ISO and it even says it on the button. Down button, I like to change to focus mode. There we go. AEL button, I don't use AEL, so I'm going to switch that to face and eye priority in autofocus. AF on button, again, I don't use that, I just use the shutter button. I'm going to change that to the focus magnifier. There we are. And the focus hold button, still the focus hold button. Okay, let's just go through this and see what our buttons do now. We'll start on the left here with the C3 button. That lets me easily change my silent shooting off and on. I like to have that right available on the camera, especially on the a7 III, where there are a lot of situations where you can't use it, but some where you can. It's nice to be able to snap back and forth. AF on button isn't going to work when I have a autofocusing lens on and I'm not in manual focus mode, but that would magnify focus. I like to use this button for it because there's a magnifying glass next to it. That's actually for when you're reviewing your pictures, but it just seems a more natural fit. Over here on the AEL button, face and eye priority. So if you find it's randomly focusing on faces and getting in the way, you can very quickly switch that off. I usually have it on. Over on the C1 button by the shutter, we can switch between animal and human eye detect. So if you need to take a picture of a dog, normally, for me at least, I don't have a lot of time to prepare for it, so I need to be able to switch it very quickly. And the focus areas lets you change what kind of focusing areas you're using in your camera. I don't want to go into too much detail on that, that's a whole other story. And again, with our thumbstick, we can turn off and on that quick jump button. So if I'm in a wide area, and I want to suddenly focus on that one point, boom, it's right there. Or if I am using the focus box and it gets lost, which happens a lot because this one's gray, press that button again, goes back to where I know it will be. Then the display button lets us cycle through those limited display modes that we have programmed. Over here on the left of the wheel, we have our drive modes. So if you want to do single shot, change through high speed continuous, medium, low, bracketing modes, and delay modes. Those are all easily available there. That's the default. And when I press down, I don't know why this isn't by default associated to a button anyway, but it lets you change between your focus modes, whether it's manual focus, continuous, automatic. I'm usually in continuous, but say I want to manually focus, I can usually go down on there. And then my focus magnification button suddenly works. And it's great that the focus magnification, if you're in a spot focus mode, will then be tied to your focus point. So even though you're not autofocusing, that focus point still serves a purpose, which is really convenient. So you can decide where you're going to spot focus in advance. And again, our trash can C4 button is monitor brightness. Our live view off and on the center button. So there you have it. That is the entirety of my setup of an a7 III. So hopefully if you got one for Christmas, or you got one to change your business around, or you got one just to play around with it as a gift for yourself, hopefully this gets you really up and running fast and easy, and we'll let you know how all this stuff works. If you have any questions about all this, just let me know down in the comments, and if you have any suggestions for future videos and things that you will need to know about more, again, let me know down in the comments. So until next time, I'm finally ready to go take some photos.